Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Death on the Nile from 1978. Now, frequent watchers of this series will have noted that some months ago now, actually, it's been a little while, I watched another Agatha Christie movie adaptation, that being Murder on the Orient Express from 1974, I believe. That movie and the success of it is what spawned this movie to be created. And it has a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. I won't go into a long diatribe again about how the new Death on the Nile, made by our least favorite actor, director, egotist, Kenneth Branagh, shouldn't be watched or supported. But yeah, go back and watch my other videos for that. So, talking about Death on the Nile, it's definitely, I think, a weaker film than Murder on the Orient Express for a variety of reasons. If you watched one and the other, obviously they were released 4 years apart, but if you watched them back to back, I assume that the contrast would be all the more stark. In particular, the recasting of Poirot, in this case being Peter Ustinov, is a dramatic change in his characterization. On Murder on the in Murder on the Orient Express, that is possibly the most eccentric and odd Poirot I've seen on film. Whereas I would probably say Ustinov, I'm not sure which. I've heard people say Ustinov a lot. I think that's how he used to say it, but I don't know. Plays Poirot more like a jolly old fellow with a few odd experiences, more so than anything else. And I do feel like it takes some of the character out of him. You certainly get the sense that he's had experiences, but part of Poirot's appeal, I think, is that he's a bit cold and weird, and everybody's slightly put off by him while simultaneously being very impressed because he's the famous detective Poirot. And aside from a bit of social awkwardness, very little of that comes through in this film. Ustinov is also notably different. Is notably different visually. He is kind of dirty blonde, both in his hair and in his mustache. The lighting changes things a bit, so it depends scene to scene, but that's notable. He is possibly the most rotund of any Poirot. He is quite large. Well, he's not like huge, and you don't get the sense that he's like waddling or anything, but he is larger. He also seems to possibly be the oldest that he ever is. And I don't know where this film or this story stands in the chronology. At the end, near the end of the film, he does make an offhand comment about having already historically handled the Murder on the Orient Express. But I don't know how old he's actually supposed to be here. Clearly his reputation precedes him nonetheless. Once again, we've got a generally ensemble cast with a variety of notable actors at various levels. Possibly the weirdest one, and I mean this in a good way mostly, is David Niven playing Poirot's counterpart, sort of the like sidekick slash, the Watson character, for want of a better phrase. It's a different character than the one in Murder on the Orient Express, but he does a great job. It's David Niven. He's very capable as an actor. At the time this came out, he probably maybe would have been the more notable actor than Ustinov. Ustinov, both of them had rather prolific careers. But I think Niven was probably better known. And he does just sort of stand out on the screen. He's visually, as a person, visually stands out to begin with, and he does have his typical like patented sort of thin mustache going as usual as well. So it's not like he's trying to fade into the background. That's the other thing. This is possibly the portrayal of Poirot that seems to have the least focus on Poirot, and whether that is a matter of him just not being nearly as strongly characterized, or if it's actually written in such a way that he is de-emphasized, I can't entirely nail down. But Poirot really at no point feels like the main character. Even, towards the end where he's doing his typical gather everyone around and announce his conclusions, he still doesn't particularly feel like the main character, or at least less so than any other portrayal I can think of. It is, again, kind of weird and not necessarily bad. Like, I'm not offended by it, and I don't think it's like a betrayal of Poirot as a character. I just think it kind of undersells his value and what makes him interesting as the detective. I could kind of go either way on it. Weirdly enough, I didn't find this out until a little bit before recording this. Apparently, Ustinov would go on to portray Poirot, I think, like 5 or 6 more times, mostly in TV movies, and I think one more feature film. Kind of fascinating. Don't think I knew that, or if I did, it definitely slipped my mind. So they must have enjoyed his performance. It must have performed well enough. But and I would say this is arguably the more approachable and like general purpose charismatic version of him, just because he's not like the Belgian weirdo. But I think that's a shame. In the interest of making him more generally appealing, I think he loses some depth. The rest of the cast, however, whole bunch of notable actors. People probably certainly know Maggie Smith as Professor McGonagall. Mia Farrow, Angela Lansbury, a bunch of notable names here. Is this the right time to talk about this? I guess so. There's one Indian actor in this film about Egypt. And it's bad. It's real bad. He is he's the guy who owns and runs the steamboat they're on, and he's definitely Indian. apparently the actor himself, is Johar, was particularly like a very prolific actor in his own right, in mostly in Indian cinema, Indian language cinema. But as far as I can tell, he's putting on the accent. The accent is not his normal accent. Um, and he's putting it on, and he's putting it on Indian. He's not putting it on like, he's not. I have so many questions, and I don't want answers to any of them, because somewhere in the process of writing this movie and this character, somebody said brown people, right? They're all the same. So we'll cast an Indian man as an Egyptian, and have him do a kind of, well, at a minimum, questionable Indian accent. But I think, as far as I can tell, he's not supposed to be Indian. He's supposed to be Egyptian. So, sure, that's a massive problem. There's also some various like portrayals of Egyptian people problems as well. It's not as aggressively bad as it could be, but there are more of a more. The whole characterization of Egypt is problematic, to say the least, and how much of that you can attribute to Christie's original writings and the setting being in the 1930s, and the British colonial attitude towards its, imperial influence. There's a whole lot to potentially unpack there. It does have the movie does have a, whether intentional or not, a very colonial feeling to it, and I'm sure that some of that is deliberate. Obviously, a bunch of British nobles going to Egypt in the 30s for vacation is inherently colonial. But there are also some aspects of it that I feel like were not intentional, and more just sort of evolved out of it, that are pretty bad. That does get into sort of the production of the film overall, and the cinematography, and a whole bunch of other stuff. There's a lot of the film that was shot in Egypt, and shot like literally on the Sphinx and on the pyramids. I don't remember exactly when Egypt closed those down and stopped letting people walk all over them. It might have been before 78. I don't know, but they're climbing all over them. They're walking through ruins and just, all over. They're not really, they're treating them in a very colonial way. And while it's concerning to me personally, purely from a archaeological preservation perspective of like, please don't. But that's neither here nor there. They do an incredible amount of exploration of these real world places. And apparently it caused a bunch of production issues, but we won't get into that. It's very impressive. There's some really gorgeous composition, like cinematic compositions, that really use the, like, give some level of questionably imperial reverence to the majesty of Egyptian ruins. But it is kind of overshadowed by the imperialist attitudes and so on and so forth. It's mostly used as a very pretty backdrop. Now, Egypt in the 70s was, well, Egypt in the 70s was a lot of things, but it was, as far as I'm aware, a no longer had shirked most of its imperial influences, and apparently was trying to drive some amount of increased tourism to the country. In addition, the film was apparently released in conjunction with an exhibit somewhere. I don't remember exactly. I just skimmed this a few minutes ago, but an Egyptian or a big exhibit at some British or American museum of a whole bunch of King Tut's stuff. So that was supposed to be sort of released contemporaneously, and I think they delayed the film to release at the exact same time. And that gets into a problem with the overall composition and the pacing and a whole bunch of other things. The film is too long. It's 2.5 hours, or it's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and it is an hour too long. The inciting incident does not happen until an hour into the film. That's normally somewhere between the 22 and 28 minute mark on a 2 hour film, and it's an hour into this film. And unfortunately, that first hour is where all the nice visuals are. All of the, shooting in the Egyptian ruins and on the Nile and all these other things. It's all there. And then once the incident happens, it's all indoors, and really undercuts any attempt to use the Nile as anything other than a backdrop. It is not particularly key to any element of the story at all. There are a few side elements that are secondarily or tertiarily related to where they are, but really it's just another remote scenic location. And I don't know how that reflects versus the original novel. I haven't read it. I think it was heavily simplified. Obviously, any novel turned into a movie of, well, even a movie this long is going to have a substantial amount rewritten, cut, simplified, etc. But my recollection of what Christie works I have read is this is heavily dumbed down. And in fact, very little goes on in the film. It feels like it relies a lot more on both the visual spectacle and climactic incidents, multiple of them throughout, to attempt to keep your attention versus any kind of real intrigue. Murder on the Orient Express struggled with this a little bit, but not very much. On the whole, the investigation portion was engaging in its own right. And in this one, it is not. It is dull. The first hour of the movie is dull because while we're learning about various characters in various ways, little by little, it's not that interesting, and it feels sort of heavy-handed. So it comes off more like a tourism ad than anything else. And then the rest of the film is kind of dull because the investigation is not that much of an investigation. It's mostly just Poirot going around and saying in the most minor of spoilers here, all of you have, every single person here has means, motive, and whatever the three things are. I'm tired. You'll have to excuse me. And then at the end, he just sort of pulls it out of his ass. Again, that was sort of a problem in a little bit in Murder on the Orient Express, but it pans out in Murder on the Orient Express because while there's a certain amount of, wait, man, you didn't show me any of the stuff that allowed me to come to these same conclusions as you did, and therefore it's kind of unsatisfying because it feels like you're just telling me that it was solved rather than showing me that I could have solved it if I had just been paying more attention. This has it far, far worse, because while simultaneously very little intrigue goes on and very little explanation is given, there's also a surprising amount of deceptive imagery used in order to deliberately keep the viewer in the dark about what's going on. And yet, at the same time, if you're paying any attention at all, it's kind of glaringly obvious who is going to be the culprit or culprits. Because it's just like, it's very ham-fisted. And so it's not very satisfying, and it feels like you've just been like dragged around by the nose a bunch, and Poirot goes, it could be this person, and then at the end he's like, no, but it was actually these ones, and it's these ones because the director's kind of bad and had these characters make it more obvious than the others, and also because I've made up a bunch of evidence at the last minute to make it this way so that it comes to the conclusion that the story needs, which is not like, I'm not going to say Christie is a perfect writer as far, like, her stuff is kind of pulpy to begin with, but it's not this clunky, and it is clunky. It is very clunky. So it's too long. It's not very satisfying as a mystery. It doesn't hold tension. It's just generally paced badly. And ultimately leaves kind of a bitter taste in your mouth. Now, that's not to say that there aren't good things about it. A lot of the performances, like I said, are pretty good. Like they're very good performances with some kind of questionable screenplay adaptation. So there's only so far they can go with it. Visually, substantial chunks of the movie are pretty stunning. In particular, not just the like scenic shots, but also some of the interior stuff right at the beginning, and then like maybe 20 minutes in, there's some really incredible stuff. There's also some really, really nice costumes, like gorgeous dresses, like kind of incredible. And just generally speaking, everybody is really well dressed. But a couple of the dresses stand out in particular as being like kind of bizarrely nice. So the costuming is really nice all the way around. The sets waver, and unfortunately one of the weaker sets is the main setting of the steamboat. Again, I think I said in Murder on the Orient Express, some of that may be down to it's kind of difficult to shoot in cramped quarters. as far as I'm aware, I don't think any of that was really done on a soundstage. I think it really was done on a boat. And so there's only so much they can do so well. But it's definitely some of the weaker visual composition and can make for a pretty muddy, cluttered frame. That said, it manages to not offend with some of the stylistic choices that Murder on the Orient Express had, as far as like transitions and editing and that weird haze that is carrying over that whole film. But despite all of that, Murder on the Orient Express is undeniably the better film, the more interesting film, the more engaging film, and in spite of some issues, usually the more visually arresting film as well. So, yeah, this one's pretty rough. Part of me has a morbid curiosity for like all of the other Ustinov performances. I might see if how many of the others are theatrical length. I think if they're all over 2 hours, I may not do it. Otherwise, I may look into it and see if it's worth exploring or if I'm just going to hurt myself doing it. It's an interesting one, but I don't think I can particularly recommend it unless you just really want to see another Poirot portrayal. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.